Hello everyone. I thought before we get into the busyness of gardening season, it might be a good idea to make a video going over exactly who I am and what my gardens are like, because my garden situation is a little bit unique. So a quick introduction. My name is Bethany. I live in Chicago with my husband and our two cats. I'm working on trying to get some more cats. I've been in Chicago now since 2012, but I did grow up just an hour outside of the city in Northwest Indiana, and I did grow up gardening. So at our home in Indiana, we had, I remember, an apple tree, pear tree, a very little garden that had some annual flowers, a raspberry bush. But then my grandpa's house in Maryville, Indiana, his whole backyard was turned into a garden with rows and rows of crops, rhubarb, pumpkins, tomatoes, basically everything. So I always was around plants and around gardening growing up, but as tends to happen, as I got into my teenage years and 20s, I didn't really care much about gardening anymore. And then when I moved to the city in my mid-20s, the first place I lived, I had no outdoor space at all, which again isn't abnormal for living in an apartment in a city. And then I think every time I moved, it got like a small amount of outdoor space, and then it just slightly got larger every time. And now I need the outdoor space because I love being outside and gardening so much. Now, on our smaller balconies, I always had like a pot of flowers, or I tried growing one tomato plant in a way too small pot, but I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew I liked being able to grow things outside. So when I really started to get into this whole world of container gardening was in 2019. Yes, 2019, because we were renting a place that had a deck, a rooftop deck. So I finally had space to grow more than just a few pots of plants. And I think I still have some photos and videos of this deck garden, so I'll put that on the screen. But that's when I started my journey of learning how to start seeds, learning sun exposure, the correct sizing of containers for plants. And a lot of what I was learning was from YouTube, but I didn't really see many specific container gardening videos where everyone was just gardening in containers. So that's why I started sharing my journey, I think back in 2021, but don't look at those videos because I'm very awkward. But that's what really got me started into sharing my gardening journey, with the hopes of showing people that don't have a lot of space or any yard at all that you can grow almost anything you want in containers. So that's what really started me kind of deep diving into everything. And then it kind of became an addiction. I would say most people who garden do fall in love with it in that way. So 2019, we were renting a place. 2020, we actually purchased our first place. So now I have a little bit more control over like paint on the walls and what I do here. But this came with 2 rooftop decks. So let me talk a little bit about my garden setup. Nothing I grow is in the ground. We do technically have some ground, but it's the parkway up front, which is between the sidewalk and the street. There are 2 trees there. I try to put bulbs, some seeds in there, but because there are so many roots in such a small space, and because all of the salt, all of the exhaust from the cars parked on the road are right next to it, it doesn't do the best. So I don't put a lot of time and effort into it. Also, technically the city owns the parkway, so if they ever need to tear anything up, they can. And I wouldn't want to spend a lot of time and money on a place that can get torn up. The other ground we have is a small rectangle in front of our house, which already had some bushes and hydrangeas. I haven't done anything there, but we don't have what I would consider a yard. And growing up in Indiana, which was very suburban, even rural for parts of the city I lived in, I was used to giant yards where people could have a garden and whatever else they wanted, a play set, everything. You're running through the grass. So when I moved here, it was very different. And I wasn't sure if I could garden the way I wanted to without having a yard. But then I found out that I could. So here we have 2 rooftop decks. One is right at the doors that way. So I am on a 3rd story. So a lot of buildings in Chicago are very narrow and tall versus shorter and wider. And because there really isn't a lot of yard space, a lot of your outdoor space is on top of your living space. So things like rooftop decks, garage decks are very common in the city. I think if I built a garage deck Back in my hometown, people would think that was very weird, but here, again, it's typical. That's where people have their outdoor space. So 2 rooftop decks, both 18 by 19 square feet. The one over here faces east, so it gets full sun, but it's full morning sun. The west also gets full sun, but it is full afternoon sun. So it is a little bit hotter out on the west facing deck than it is on the east facing deck. And I have noticed that some plants do prefer the east versus the west, especially my hydrangeas. So even with those 2 decks that are not even really that far apart, the growing conditions are already very different. So when we moved in here, those were the 2 outdoor spaces we had. Trying to be a good partner, I told myself I was only going to take over the west facing deck with plants, which I did for a year or 2. And then I started planting more on the east facing deck, but my husband does love it because I've made it look prettier. I think for the first 2 years, it was literally just an empty deck with our furniture out there, but now it's a place that really looks beautiful in the middle of the city. And because everyone's close together and buildings are tall, other people around can see it too. So that makes me happy that people can see the flowers poking over the roof of our home. So because I garden on decks, I have to, 1, grow everything in containers. So I have a mix of raised beds, grow bags, terracotta pots, ceramic pots, any item that I can turn into a pot up here. And everything has to be carried upstairs. So it has to be lightweight enough that I can get it upstairs. Usually the heaviest thing I carry up is soil. And our decks do have a weight limit, so always make sure if you're gardening on a balcony or rooftop that you know the weight limit of your deck or balcony so you don't overload it. But I don't have anything gigantic up here. What probably weighs the most is a raised bed filled with soil, but I don't have any giant trees or anything like that out here. Because we are on a rooftop, even though our summers are always hot and humid, it feels so much hotter up here than compared to at ground level. And I've noticed that with my plants too. I will have spring bulbs on the rooftop deck and then maybe a pot down on the front stoop. And plants up here start to poke out of the soil earlier than the ones downstairs. And then same thing at the end of the season. The rooftop decks, the plants up here tend to live a little bit longer just because it is so much hotter all the way up on the deck, which is great, I guess, for a little bit longer of a growing season. But in the summer, I'm usually out in the garden in the morning or like after 6 o'clock because it can be very hot in the middle portion of the day and there's absolutely no shade up here, just the sky above. So it does get very hot, but it does make for very good growing conditions for a lot of flowers and vegetables. So up until 2024, I was just gardening on 2 rooftop decks, but now we built last year, 2024, a new garage deck because what was there was rotting and you could not use it. So now we have 20 by 20 more square feet of space. So now where my gardens are situated can be a little bit confusing. So I did put together a very detailed, very professional looking drawing to kind of help you understand where things are. The 2 rooftop decks are on the same floor. So again, they're the roof of the 2nd story, but on either side, and you just walk through a room from one to the other. The garage deck is on top of the garage, so it's just 1 story up, and you have to go down and up. So there's no way to easily get things from a rooftop deck down to a garage deck. They're not connected or anything like that unless I install the slide, which I don't think would be safe to do. But this space, the new deck space, is going to be different for a few reasons. First of all, and this was, I think, just because of gardening, we went with not wood because the wood up here on our rooftop decks, I'm trying to be very, very, very careful with because wood and water sitting on it don't mix very well, which is why I have a bunch of wheels or lifts underneath my pots. I'll link down below the video where I go into every single thing I put under my pots, and I'll make a new one this year too when we get to that point. Down there, it's a tile, which means I'm still gonna be very careful, but I feel like I can put larger containers or some different things out there than I'd be comfortable doing here. Also, because it's only a story up, I still don't want to get anything really heavy that I can't carry up 1 flight of stairs, but I can do larger trees and heavier containers than I probably could do up here, or definitely, because we have 4 containers out there now that my husband and I carried through the house, and it was difficult, and there's no way we could have carried them up here. So I am going to have a bit more flexibility with what I can grow, but what I'm probably most excited for is there's a pergola. So I'll have some shade because like I said, I love being outside, but typically up here it's too hot in the summer to be comfortable. Of course, it's January and I'm complaining about it being too hot in Chicago, but it's too hot to really just sit and enjoy outside on the rooftop deck during the middle of the day. But if we want to have people over on the weekend, we can go out there and we have the pergola. So this does have slats that open and close. Everything just got finished, I think in November, so I haven't even really sat outside and used it, but I can open them if I want the sun and the rain to come through, which is probably what I will do most of the time, is leave the slats open. However, I can also close it and then have complete shade. So not only will I get to actually have a space I can enjoy in the summer that's not too hot, but I have a space where I can look to grow some shade or part shade, part sun plants. Because I haven't really gotten to spend a lot of time with the pergola, when you're starting gardening, I always like to look around my space, get a feel for it. I don't know exactly how much sun will come through the slats when they're open. If there was no pergola at all, it would 100% be a full sun location. So I'm wondering, how shady is it going to be? Maybe some corners will be much shadier than others. So I might get to try some new plants down there that I haven't been able to try so far, or I'm definitely going to grow some hydrangeas. And I'm excited to see if they prefer it down there much more than they do up here in the heat. So those are some of the things I'm really looking forward to this year, is just gardening in a new environment. Again, even though it's just a few feet away and a couple stories down, it is a completely new environment for me. So I am so excited for that. We also have the breezeway that connects the garage to the house, so that'll give me a little bit more growing space there. But this, to me, again, growing in a city, is a huge amount of outdoor space. But again, if you're coming from somewhere where you have acres of land, it's going to seem very small. I actually don't mind being limited in space because I already find I love gardening. I love doing the work, but I don't want it to take up a ton of time, so much time that I don't get to enjoy the garden. So I do kind of like that balance of I have my limitations. So even though I'll cram a bunch of stuff into my garden, I don't have to spend as much time tending to it because I don't really have that much space. Also, I do find that there are a lot of benefits to container gardening, like not really having to weed. I do have to water more often, but once you set up irrigation, that's pretty easy. So I find container gardening much lower maintenance in general. So that is a little bit of a look at my space. Again, very detailed drawing. I have 3 total decks. Each are about 20 by 20, and every single thing is grown in containers. 2 of my decks are full sun, 1 morning, 1 afternoon, and 1 I think will be part sun to part shade, but I have to get more familiar with that space. A little bit more about me and my background. I have no horticulture or gardening background other than like growing up gardening and helping my mom and my grandparents. I went to school and I majored in business, got my MBA. I work in digital marketing. That's my regular job, and I do work from home. It's a very, very important thing to note as far as just me being able to work in my garden. I've worked from home since 2015, 2016. I love it. I don't think I can go back to having to like wake up early and make sure I eat my breakfast at a certain time and leave at a certain time and deal with traffic. My days are very flexible and my office is actually connected to the west-facing deck. So as long as I'm not in a meeting, if I want to pop out for a few minutes and I don't know, harvest some flowers, I can. And sometimes if it's not boiling hot or freezing cold, I will work outside as well. That's another reason I think I will enjoy the covered garage deck, is because I'll be able to work out there a lot easier. Now, even though I didn't major in anything related to horticulture, which now looking back as a 38-year-old, I wish 18-year-old Bethany knew that this was what she was passionate about, I did just complete my horticulture certification through the University of Illinois. So I took 4 classes. I took 1 class a semester over the last 2 years, and now I have my horticulture certification. It doesn't mean I'm a master gardener. That's a separate program. I don't even technically know like if I can say, oh, I'm a certified horticulturalist, but I can say I have my horticulture certification. And I found out that I can get my master's with either 4 or 5 more classes. I need to check if one of the classes I took can be counted as both. So if I already took 4 classes towards my certification and it'd only be 4 more classes towards my master's, I might do that, which is really exciting. And it's so different studying about something you are very passionate about. Not that I wasn't passionate about accounting or marketing, but not in the same way that I love learning about plants, horticulture, all of that. So it's been really fun. It's been a really fun journey. It's almost like I'm doing more things now that I did when I was a child, and I really like having those things back in my life. So that's a little bit about me and my growing space. And I did realize I forgot to mention my growing zone. It is 6A here in Chicago. And our season probably goes from early to mid-May when it starts to later October, early November, just depending on the weather that year. So that is what it's like to garden in an urban area without any ground. Let me know if you have any questions about me or my gardens. I will either answer them down below, or if there is a lot of them, I might make another video. But I just thought it'd be helpful to kind of get an idea of what I'm working with, so that way when you're watching my videos in the future, you understand the space that I'm growing in and how it compares to your own garden. And actually, you know what? I'm interested. Let me know if you just garden in containers, or if you garden all in ground, or if you do a bit of both. Because I've always wondered how many people here are like me, where it is just all in containers versus people that do actually have yard space to garden in. So let me know down below, and then I will see you in the next video for a deep dive into my Gomphrena haul. Bye.